Welcome to the instructional video for setting up a club website using the templates from soroptimist.org. We're assuming to start that you have purchased a domain name and set up a hosting account. Please have your login information ready for your FTP user and your MySQL user. To start, log in to soroptimist.org/clubweb, the page you see here. Read this page thoroughly to get a sense of what is available here in terms of guidelines, how-to manual, and tutorials. We will begin by scrolling down to the bottom where we have a MySQL database available for download, as well as the file system files. Basically, these are the two parts that you need to get your website running. The file system contains all the files and the graphics and so on, and the database contains the configuration, most of the configuration files, or configuration settings, as well as the content of the pages. So after you build the site, your database will be customized with information specific to your website, and you do not want to replace the database after you've begun to do configuration if you don't want to lose that configuration. There are two file systems here. The first one helps you get started if you don't have anything on your site currently and you want to start from scratch. The second one allows you to apply updates, upgrades, and security updates and bug fixes without erasing the one file that you do need to change for configuration settings. And this will overwrite the theme files and the program files with the latest version. So download these two files: the new site file default file system.zip and the MySQL database file. Once you've downloaded the files, we basically need to upload the file system to your new host and then connect the database to it. So you may want to check with your host. Depending on your hosting plan, it's possible that your host would do this part of the process for you and will move the files into the correct folder and upload the database for you. If not, find the files that you've downloaded on your computer, wherever you downloaded them to, and typically you will not need to unzip the database file, but for regular FTP uploads, you'll have to open up or unzip the file system. So we're going to double-click on that on this Mac to unzip it, unarchive it. On Windows, you'll need an unzip of some kind. You might be able to right-click on the file and choose unzip. Now that will leave you with a folder containing all of the files for the file system. So click into that folder so you see all of the files, and open up an FTP client program. In this case, I'm using CyberDuck, which is now available for Windows and Mac as well. At this point, we'll need to connect to your host. So open a connection to the server. In this case, if you've set up your hosting, you should be able to type in your host name or your domain name here, and your username and password, which you should have received from your host as well. Type them in here. If you haven't changed the default settings, you may have to choose FTP here. In this case, ours was set up using SFTP, which is more secure, but if yours isn't set up that way, make sure you select FTP here. Type in the password and click Connect. In this case, since it's a secure connection, it's asking me whether it should save the host name. Yours may not ask that if you're using regular FTP. At this point, you'll get a list of all of the directories that are within your account. Double-click on the directory, which is the root directory of your website. Some hosts, such as DreamHost, will give you the directory name as the domain name. Some hosts will have a file called public_HTML. Some may be just called public. The host will be able to answer a question if you're unsure which directory is the root directory for your website. So in this case, there's a few default files that are that are installed here. I'm just going to clear those out because we don't need those. And now we have an empty folder here. And so basically I'm going to go to the folder that contains all of the files that we downloaded from soroptimist.org. I'm going to select them all and drag them into that folder. So what we're doing at this point is copying all these files into the root directory of the website. So once they're all copied over, when we go to visit our new domain name, we'll see these files. Now at this point it still won't be connected to the database, which is the final step in order to get the default template running. Now while the file system is uploading, this may take a little while, and the length of time it takes will also depend on the speed of your internet connection. Luckily, while that is uploading, we can get started on the next step. Log in to your host panel. In this case, the example will be using DreamHost. You're not required to use DreamHost at all. That's just what we'll use for this example. Other hosts will have similar interfaces that allow you to do similar things, but they may be organized slightly differently. So you may need, if you can't make the connection between what we're doing here and how it looks on your host, you may need to contact your support team at your host. Basically what we're going to do is create a database on the host and upload the database content from the file that we downloaded. In DreamHost, we're going to go to the MySQL databases section, and you can click in here in the toolbox if you've got it set up there. Otherwise, under the Goodies panel, you'll see the MySQL databases link. So we'll click on that. On this page, you will not have all of the databases that we have here, but at the bottom of the page, you'll see the area where you may type in a database name. So we will type in Soroptimist Demo. That's going to be the name of the database. And take note of the names that you're giving here, because we'll need to use them later to connect the file system with the database. You'll need to create a new host name if you haven't set one up before. We're going to be able to use one that we've set up before, but if you didn't have one, choose Create a New Host Name. Type in the host name you'd like, usually MySQL dot, and then your domain name. And you'll need to create a new user. I'll do that here as well. So we'll say, again, Soroptimist Demo. You don't have to have the same database name and username, but you can if you want, as long as it's not already selected by someone else on your server. And then type in a password. And if you'd like, at least on DreamHost, you have the ability to type in a comment to help you remember what the database is. So I'm going to add this database. Now the database is set up. One thing to note, if you have created a new host name, it might take a little while for the host name to propagate, especially if you've just registered your domain name. You may need to take a pause here and wait for that to propagate. It may take a number of hours. It may take up to a day. If you've had the host name registered already, this should not take nearly as long. At this point, we should have the MySQL database imported correctly with all the tables and the data imported. And hopefully by this point, the FTP transfer is complete. If it's not complete, you'll have to wait for that to complete before following along to the next step. But for now, we're going to move along to the FTP client here. You can see on this window here that all the file system has been transferred over into the correct folder. Now, the last step we need to do is to connect the file system and the database. You'll see at the moment, if we go to the domain name that we have been working on, it jumps to an installation page because it sees the file system there, but it doesn't find a database connection. So basically, instead of going through that default installation, we're going to connect the database information that we uploaded so that some of the information and the themes are pre-populated and pre-configured. So go back to your FTP client and Within the file system that you uploaded, go to the Sites folder, and then the default folder. You'll see two files here. And the settings.php file is the one that contains the settings to connect the database and the file system. So I'm going to click on Edit, and we need to make sure to edit this in a text editor, not a rich text editor such as Microsoft Word or so on, something that just edits the text and doesn't add any additional formatting. If you're following along in the manual that you downloaded from siroptimist.org, you'll be able to see the string here that we're searching for, but basically the db_URL variable here contains the string that will allow it to connect the file system to the database. So you'll see a number of placeholders here. The first one is username, so I'm going to highlight the word username in this string and delete it, and then type in the username that I set up when I was creating the database. And the next placeholder is called password, which, just as it sounds, means the password that you set up with the MySQL database. Hopefully more secure than my demo password here. Now, the placeholder called localhost, on DreamHost, we'll need to change this to the MySQL domain that we set up. Many other hosts will allow you to just use the word localhost, and that'll tell it to look on the local computer. But in this case, we have to, since we're doing the demo on DreamHost, we have to type in the domain that we're using for MySQL. The database name placeholder gets replaced with the database name that we set up again earlier. That's basically all we need to do to connect the file system, which we're editing the settings in the file system right now, to the database. So I'm going to save that, close the text editor, and go back to my browser to do a final check here. If we go back to the domain name, instead of the installation page, we should see the default ClubWeb site page. And at this point, you can continue along in the manual in relation to logging into the site and changing some of the default settings and getting familiar with the administrative interface.